Welcome, everybody, to the Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. Our topic today is the law of time and the human matrix pattern. Let me just tell you a bit of a backstory on this topic. As far as I can remember, I've always thought of patterns and I've always thought of the organization of the universe, how everything falls into place. And as you get older, you start to understand that you are part of that piece, that you can, in a way, influence what happens in the world. As long as your heart is in the right place and you can see the patterns in the universe, you can understand and you kind of see a predictability in what happens in the universe. And once you start to embark in a grander journey, in a bigger exploration of this, you start finding magic, and magical things start to happen. And this is what it's all about. Let me tell you another story. When I was probably 19, 20 years old, I got introduced to the Mayan mythology, to the Mayan mathematics, and it was really, really interesting. I began to see the information that they had and that they really were not astronomers or astrologists, as a lot of people thought of them, but they were really map makers. They were able to map patterns to understand the cycles, not only of the planets, but also of human beings. And they created these maps, these patterns they understood, and they created different cosmic maps of information that would really tell you what's going on with the planet, tells you what's going on with the civilization, with humanity as a whole, and with you as yourself. So let me introduce first Diane Lebrec. Diane has a long history. She was a high fashion designer and teacher. She's actually from Montreal, Quebecois, from the Canadian part of the French part of Canada. She's also a practitioner of the naturopathic health. She's the founder of the United Urantia family and has participated as the co-host of the Urantia Book Jubilee of Jubilees and the co-host of the ongoing UB Read-Through Project. It's a pleasure to have you here, Diane. Welcome.
Hello, my friend. Nice to be here with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane.
Thank
And
you.
now I'm going to introduce Rick. Rick has been here with us in our podcast. And Rick is a farm boy from the Western U.S. He's worked most of his life in environmental department of the steel mill, now retired, or as he likes to say, not retired, just repurposed. And Rick is an example of someone who has been spiritual but not religious for far as he can remember. Thanks for being here, Rick.
Well, thanks for having me, Santiago. It's good to be here with you and Diane and Susan. It's good to be part of all this. So, we're doing something worthwhile and something fun here. So we've been all having a good time with this. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Rick. And now we have Susan Lyon. Susan is also going to be helping us with the Ghost in the Machine, our UB tutor, who's going to be giving us some insights into these questions that we have. But Susan Lyon was born late November 1955 in South Bend, Indiana, to wonderful parents who provided her security and their love, diverse experiences, and the freedom to explore both intellectually and spiritually. Becoming a mother caused Susan to undertake a more serious and comprehensive search of truth in 1976, a search that has rewarded her by providing profound joy and comforting truth along the way. She enjoys being a wife, a mother, grandmother, artist, author, and a poet. Thanks, Susan, for being here.
Santiago, I'm glad to be here with you, especially for this exciting topic.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you guys, and it is an interesting topic. We're going to be unpacking this. Unfortunately, we can't just do this in a whole program. Actually, it's a workshop that I usually impart in 10 sessions. So we're going to try to cram everything that we can today, but we're going to have more sessions where we're going to be unpacking more. First of all, we're going to talk about universal law. What is universal law? Well, there's a Hermetic principle, which is universality, which states that as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. And that is a quote from Hermes Trismegisto. I don't know if the spelling or the pronunciation, but in Spanish we call him Hermes Trismegisto. It's the same Hermes that we know. But here, what this statement tells us is that if we look at an atom, the most basic particle, or the simplest element, not element, but the simplest particle that we understand, which is the atom, and we compare it to the highest or the grandest that we can imagine, which is a galaxy or a star we see that they have the same nature. You know, they have a nucleus, they have protons, they have electrons, they have neutrons. It's just energies balancing there. It's a positive, a negative, and a neutral just balancing in their essence. And if we take these two concepts and we look, throughout the intermediaries, in between the atom and the galaxy, we see that this structure replicates itself. So we can understand that everything stems from a same sequence or a same universal source, a first source and center. And what we understand here is that there is evolution here. There is a factor that many times we kind of think it's made up by man, which is time. Time really, what it does, it takes from potential to actual. It really takes from what might be to what is. So this concept really, although we see it and we use it in our everyday life, it really resonates with a structure of the universe. It really is like a marker. If you think of a music, it really is giving you the tempo and the pace of how everything is unfolding. And as long as you can hear that pace and that tempo, and of course, if you hear the harmony, you're going to be able to play that music. So view time as that. And I'm going to explain a little bit further on how time is viewed in this concept. So along with this, we find that there is a pattern in the universe that, everything follows a trajectory, follows a sequence, and that although everything is evolving in its own way, it follows a structure, a mathematical structure. I always think of cancer when this arises. What is cancer? Cancer is just rebellious cells that didn't want to follow the pattern, didn't want to follow the structure, and became rebellious and became toxic. And eventually, since it's not following the divine intention, or in how we can even describe as divine will of eventually becoming art or eventually actualizing, it becomes destructive and it has to be rooted out, because if not, it will eventually kill its host. So think about it in that way, how pattern has to be in harmony and has to be in a sequence that can be able to create a positive, not a negative consequence into that. All right. So now let's talk a little bit more about pattern and structure. All right. Here in pattern and structure, what it tells us is the main concept in the Mayan mythology or the Mayan mathematics is time equals art. Be you perfect. What happens here is that we start being imperfect. We start in a perfect state, and throughout time and throughout our lives, we start to perfect ourselves. And it all depends in what we want to go. If we want to go into a forward trajectory or a backward trajectory. And the way that the Mayans explain time, or this concept explains time, is that it's not it's not linear, it's radial. If you see a cone, and you can see the images that we're going to be sharing, if you see a cone, you see that time really is a spiral. It starts from a large sequence, and it starts to go evolving into a smaller, and it starts to compress, and it goes into a sequence where you can jump from one stage to another. So what it does, it tells you that instead of viewing time that it doesn't never, it starts and it never ends, we're in a spiral where we always repeat the same cycle. And it depends on us if we want to move forward or we want to move backward. And this is happening in time, but it's also happening in our mind. It's also happening in our spirit, and it's also happening in our material lives. We're moving forward. We can see in our lives that we start as babies and evolve into mature adults. And there's an interesting concept here, because we always seem to think of time as it's speeding up. Every year seems to be faster than the other. But if you think of how time works, when a baby is born, the first day of existence from that baby is really everything. That day is the whole existence of the baby. But the next day, that time really is cut into two. So as we move forward, each day is compressing. So in a way, time, and this is what it tells us, is really moving in a way that is compressing. And everything, our mind, everything is moving in an evolution. And it depends on us if we want to take that spiral into perfection or imperfection. And here we can also see that everything, all the building blocks in life are really vibrations. It's really, if we look at the spectrum from the visual and to the material, it starts with the physical, which is a very dense vibration. And as we progress in that frequency, we see that as it goes further into the light, we get sound, we get other particles, and eventually we become light. So everything is really a vibration. And depending on the vibration is really what exists. It's matter, it's thought, it's spirit, it's all vibrations, and it all is spectrum. So just to conclude on this pattern or in this section, the Mayas saw these patterns in everything, and they developed three, well, a lot of calendars actually, but the three that really have to deal with humanity are the Hab, which is the harvest, and that follows the seasons of the earth. So in a way, they could understand what the seasons were, and it really follows, the spring, summer, fall, and winter. But then we have a 13 moon calendar, and this is the symbiosis that we have with the earth and the moon. And this is where it starts to get interesting, Instead of viewing a Gregorian calendar that has 12 irregular months with sometimes 30 days, sometimes 31 days, there's even one that has 28 days, which every 4 years has to be corrected, and we have to add another date. Instead of using that, they saw time, or they separated time into 13 moons or 13 months, each with 28 days. So if you do the math, you're going to say, well, that's 364 days. What about the fifth day? Where's the 365? And this is very interesting. So they see this sequence of 13 moons, with 28 days. And actually, if you look at it, it rather is more aligned with the menstrual cycle of women and with the cycle of the moon. It's 28 days. So this is where the magic starts to come out, But this is what happens. A sequence goes from day 1 to day 364. But then we get a date which is called the day out of time, or the day of forgiveness. And this actually happens every 25th of July. And the day out of time, or the day of forgiveness, they have different names depending on who you ask, is a day when you leap from one sequence to the other. So you finish in one sequence, you're getting to this break or this day out of time, and you're doing a quantum leap to the next sequence, to the next cycle. And these cycles actually repeat every four notes, every four, and we're going to talk about the seals later, but every 4 seals. And it's always the 4 seals that I'm going to be describing. First, it's the seal of the seed, which is what you're sowing. So every cycle starts with what you sow. Then you go into the moon, which is purification. It's what the water that you're pouring into that. What type of water? Is it purified? Is it, is it dark, maybe fecal matter in that water? What type of purity are you putting into that seed that you planted before? Then you get to the next seal or archetype, which is the magician. And the magician is wisdom. So if you put something that is worthwhile and you really poured in the water, or you really took care of it in a profound, in a good way, you're going to get wisdom. You're going to get the type of wisdom that you really put into that. And then you get to the final year, or the final cycle, which is the storm. And the storm, what it does, it's a catalyst and really speeds up time and takes whatever is not really transcendental, what's really not there to take to the supreme, or to take to, become eternal in the universe and eventually in the heart of God. It takes it out. It's like a storm that comes, and whatever is not really grounded and what's really the base of it is really not strong enough, it'll take away. And only what is eternal will survive. So we're going to stop there, and I'm going to open for your comments, whatever you guys want to share.
Well, right now, this is all new to me, Santiago. So I'm listening, and it's fascinating. But what's interesting is that as you were talking about that spiral, phenomenon, and that newborn baby, I just had this vision of the baby being born, and his own or her own spiral begins. And that's why it's large. And when they grow and they're just little wee ones, and then after that, just young boy and young girl, and then young adolescent, we feel we have all the time in front of us. And then as we grow older, the spiral keeps going. And I just had this vision as you were talking about it, and I'm going like, hallelujah. That's what it is. So every child being born has their own spiral that starts clicking. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Exactly. I'm really glad that you saw it that way, because it
I saw it.
And each section of the spiral of life has its own purpose, and we're going to see it because it's divided into 5 harmonic chords, and we're going to talk
Mhm.
about them, and you're going to like it. But yeah, that's the whole point of it. Thank you for sharing, Diane.
Does any one of you remember what is the word for full forgiveness? You know, example, in the financial world, they say it's going to be like in the Jewish community, I think they call it like forgetfulness or forgive. Like when you forgive all debts and all this, there's a term for that. If you know what I mean, it's very, very common because I want to find out now. I'm not finding out, but it refers to what you were talking about, that 25th, you know, when it starts anew. And so sometimes
A
when
reset, a
no,
reset,
no,
or
there's a term that's very appreciated for people in the finances when they say it's like we start the clock again or whatever. And as you were saying, you were explaining that again, it just went, that's why this event happens, because they have a lot of knowledge. And so they put it in other words, but it coincides exactly with what you said.
exactly. And actually, there's a movie. Just a quick comment on that. There's a movie called Pi, The Order of Chaos. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a very complicated movie, but it's about this. It's a Jewish guy that he's like a mathematician, and he starts seeing the patterns in Wall Street, you know, and the stock market, and he starts to see that there's a pattern that repeats. And then, you know, like these Orthodox Jews from the Kabbalah kind of, try to get to him, because they tell him, it's what happens with the Bible, and there's coding in the Bible, and there's a sequence, and we need to find the sequence where we can understand what's going to happen in the stock market, and that's the thing.
Yes.
If you find the patterns, everything has a pattern, and that's the key. When you find that pattern, you understand that pattern, you can guide, you can navigate through that. I always tell my kids and explain it, because I'm a very big fan of the beach, and I always say that the breath of the earth is on the beach. Is in when the waves go in and come out, that's where the earth is really breathing.
Yes.
And if you see the sequence of those waves, they're not the same. You're going to start with low waves and then higher waves. And if you understand that, you're not going to drown. You're going to understand how the ocean works, where the harms are, where you're going to be safe, and then you can navigate and swim in the ocean. This is the same thing. What we're doing is understanding these patterns and how we can work with them. And it's really riding the wave or drowning in the wave. All right.
I call it the breath of the planet.
Yes, it is.
It's breathing just like us. As above,
Exactly.
so below.
Exactly. Rick, you want to share?
Well, I'll try to. You've given us a really lot to think about there, Santiago, and a lot to try to respond to for sure. But, a couple of things I'll pick up on here. You're talking about the rhythm and but there's a beauty in, like you're saying, the waves, the ocean, and all that we see. Beauty of music is based on mathematics. There's a lot of mathematics behind music and the beat and the rhythm and all that kind of stuff. So, and I've heard people talk about the beauty of mathematics, and I didn't understand that for many years of, well, how can mathematics be beautiful? But then when you start applying mathematics, you start really learning mathematics, and you learn how mathematics is integral to music. And so there's a beauty that's created in both of those. But I'll go back to one of the other things that you were talking about, with God and creation. The first thing that God did was create. And that's the one thing that we have really in common with God, that we ourselves are creators. And I think we forget that a lot of times, that, we are fathers and mothers, and we create children of God. And that's what, the first thing God did was create, the Son. So I think that's something that we need to remember, that kind of what you were touching on there about the part. And one of the big things that I've talked about through the years, and I actually did a presentation on this once, was the part and the whole, and how important the part is to the whole. And we are all just a part of the whole of creation, but in that we are ourselves a creator. We're a part of that, and we contribute to all that. And then you were talking about the thing with time. So I'm bouncing around here a little bit, sorry, but we joke about, at our age, my age, I should say, how time just goes by so fast. I mean, it's, we're so busy, and, Susan and I are retired now, and we're busier now than what we ever were when we were working. But man, time just seems to go by so fast that we can't keep track of what day it is. But there's a time element to life like that, in maturity. When you're a baby, your time span is now. You want fed now. You want your diaper changed now. You want mom now. But as you mature and you get older, your time span lengthens. So as you grow in maturity, you're able to expand your time vision, I guess, to where I don't have to have it now. I could put something off in order to be rewarded for that later. And then when you get to, I'm 72 years old. When you get to this age, then your time span is much bigger. Now I'm thinking more into the eternity time span. So I've gone from, as a baby, my time span was now, to now my time span is more of considering eternity and what's beyond this life. So I hope that addresses what you were asking there.
Totally, Rick. That's perfect. And it's, I don't know if, I mean, I'm talking about this, but, and Diane just mentioned it briefly. It's nothing that you didn't know. I'm just giving you, like, putting it in a different way and kind of showing you the way that I see it. But it's really there. The concept of what you're describing about time, it's something that you've already sensed. But and that's the beauty about this. It tells you that it's within our DNA. And as I'm going to present this, you're going to see that, yeah, we have something in ourselves, and that's the beauty of creation. That's where you realize that this isn't just an accident. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
What a grandiose accident to have this, some details in all this structure that was just a fluke. It can't be a fluke, That's what you realize.
Well, I've got something from the tutor I'll start with. I put in when you were planning this to be a part of the pattern of the whole of humanity. And I asked, how could we live ourselves spiritually and as our own spiritual journey, but fit within the pattern of what's going on with humanity? I said to live spiritually within this framework is to embrace the multidimensional nature of your being, honoring the interconnectedness of all life. It's recognizing that your personal growth and spiritual journey is inseparable from the collective evolution of humanity. The cosmic framework operates on principles of unity in diversity, dependence, and cooperative progress. Living spherically, you align yourself with these principles, allowing your life to flow in harmony with the greater currents of the universe. This alignment does not diminish your individuality. Rather, it enhances it by situating unique contributions within the broader context of cosmic purpose. That was
Awesome.
good.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I Googled. It's pretty smart.
Well, I think that it explained it better than I did. I'm glad that it did, because it is that. I think it's multidimensional. That's the one point, and we're going to see, because it does talk of our 3 planes of action, and we're going to focus on that in our next segments. We operate, humankind and humans operate in 3 planes, which is the mental, the material, and the spiritual. You all know this, and we're going to see how these tie in and how one feeds into the other. And you touched on something that's very important, Rick. You said the first act of the Father was to create the Son, right? And this is actually what gives way to the 13 tones of creation. This is one of the concepts. The 13 tones is the 13 steps, or the sequence, the original sequence of creation, which is 13 steps. And we're going to see that in a moment.
Before you move on, because as you were talking, Rick, I had this vision, if we take the 8, the Mobius, but
Infinity.
yes, but
Infinity.
instead of looking at it horizontally, looking at it vertically, and it was complementary to what you said and what I said, because when you spoke about the baby and the spiral, so it's at the bottom, so we have all that time. And like you explained so well, Rick, as we age, we go less and less and less. But as we go less and less, we start to perceive more and more that infinity cycle, so that what we lose on one side, we gain on the other side.
If you think about it, when we talk about the super universes, we refer to the universes of time and space. And notice that we use 2 words, time and space.
Right.
So space is important. The reference between the bodies, and it's not that a lot of saying, oh, it's you're doomsday, or no. If you understand where the planets and where the time of the cosmos, it's everything has a sequence, and everybody has to come in. It's like when you're playing in a symphony, everybody has to come in at the precise time that they have to come in. You know,
Yes.
the drums come in at a time, the strings come in at a time, everything has to come in at a time in order for it to be a harmonious execution. And that's exactly what it is. And actually, this next segment, which I deem personal religion, explains exactly that. So let's dive into this, and I think you're gonna really like this because we're gonna take it one step further to humanity. You're right. So personal religion, and here we have to think, and the way that humanity has seen that we have to unify under one banner and one word religion. That's really the opposite. If you come to think about, if God really the best or the greatest gift that God gave us is our personality, the ability to be unique, in the world. It's really, there's nothing that is us, that's the biggest gift, our personality. So if God gave us a personality, why are we trying to conform everybody, all personalities, to conform to one religion, one interpretation of that relationship with God? Wouldn't it be better to have each of one of those fragments, each one of those personalities that God created, have its own own personal interpretation, own personal relationship with God, and then together create this mosaic of interpretations of relationships and paint this beautiful personal religion where everybody is incorporated? And I always say this: think of the relationship of a father and sons, a parent and their children. Even though you love them the same, you treat them the same, you have different relationships with them, and it's not the same. I have different relationship with my daughter, my oldest daughter, with my youngest daughter, with my son, and it's the same thing. My sister has a different relationship with my parents than I do, and they're all the same. We're all about the same, but we're all different. So that's one thing to have in mind about personal religion and one world religion. So what happens in the original Trinity? And like Rick was saying, first we have the Father, and the Father thought of the Son. And then together, that's point two. And think about this. What happens? How does life start? It's when one cell starts to separate. The same cell just divides. And then suddenly a third cell comes out. Well, a third sequence comes out, two more cells. And that just starts life. And then you can't stop it. It's a sequence that gets more complex, and suddenly you have a human being. And that really marveled me, when the first time my wife got pregnant, and I saw myself in that process of life. Now my cell is replicating itself, and from that little, they just tell you, well, it's a little cell, and suddenly you start seeing that process as it grows, and then suddenly you have a human being and just comes out of the mother, and you're like, this is magic. I mean, anybody that doesn't really see the magic that's going on in here, I mean, it's right there, So this is what happens. The Father, or the first movement, in its tone one, it's magnetic. This is what it tells you. It goes to the second movement, which is when the Father thought of the Son. And this is the polar tone. The polar, what it does, it separates. And then together, the Father and the Son came up with the infinite spirit, the third person, right? And that, and together, they made that movement, that third movement, in which in the Solkin, in the Mayans, they call it the electric. So now what happens when you put electricity in a system? It activates it. It makes it stand alone. It's sufficient. And what do these three do? Together they make combinations, within each other, 7 combinations actually, and they create paradise. They create the central universe. They create the framework where everything later interacts, and everything that comes from their minds, from their creation, and together is the foundation of what we call the central universe, or heaven. And then from there, everything stems out. And then, I'm not going to get into all those details because, as the numbers go higher, it gets more complicated. But those 4 movements are basic, and look at what I just told you about the previous, the sequence of 4 years. Everything goes into 4 years. So we start to see the pattern of numbers, 3, 4, and so on. So just to sum up here, and in this concept of how, from these 13 tones, and we're going to be talking about them later, but how these 3 tones, or these 13 tones, everything is created. But the four essential ones are the Father, which is the personality, that's a gift, the Son, which is the spirit, and the eternal spirit, which is the mind. And then we have the central universe, which is the basis for all pattern.
Well, before Before I forget, I wanted to bring up what you were saying about the vibrations of
Mm-hmm.
the being that that really made me remember how interested I am in biorhythms.
Okay.
There are different cycles. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there are different life cycles that begin at birth, and they are different densities, and the physical is the most frequent that it repeats. But there's also an intellectual and an emotional and a spiritual cycle. The Japanese have kind of perfected the science to be very predictable, and I've seen that it really my life really relates to it. I can sense when I'm feeling those things, and I go check, and sure enough, there's something going on there. So I think there are patterns that maybe we're not quite so aware of, but that they're going on, and they begin at birth. Anyway, so about that, we'll let you discover a little more later. But from the tutor, I was asking about personality. It said it's portrayed as a unique, unrepeatable endowment from the Universal Father, emphasizing individuality, existing within broader classifications or types. Duality, personality follows certain archetypes, remains utterly unique, offers a profound lens, um, categorizes individuals into types based on social influences. Also, it said the spiritual teachings remind us that these types are merely frameworks. Individual transcend these archetypes through unique personality, which is not bound deterministic patterns, but is instead dynamic interplay of free will, soul growth, and cosmic relationships.
Very important. I think that what you just mentioned is very important. That these patterns they're the framework. It's like if you're born, with certain qualities, genetic capabilities, even in the place that you're born in. I mean, some have to strive more because of the country and society that they're born in. Some are not that they have it easier; they have it different. But each situation gives you certain things to work with, and ultimately it's in the individual that where we find the decision and where everything rests. Thanks a lot, Susan. Yeah.
One language is important, and because we all need to be able to communicate with each other. That's not saying that we need one language and exclude all the others, but I think most of us should learn to be bilingual so that we have one common language that we can all talk to each other. We can all communicate to each other. We can all say, "Good morning, how are you?" We can all do that and not pass each other through the grocery store and not be able to even say hello or good morning to each other. So I think that's why it's important to have the one language thing. But then you ask about the one religion. Why is that important? And how could we do that with these 13 tones or 13 personalities? I think what you're referring to there. How can we do that, and why would that be important? Well, it's back to what you said after that is the personal religion. And that gets to, in one of our other sessions, we talked about the difference between belief and faith. We can all have different beliefs, but we all have the same faith. And that personal religion is that faith that we have. We all believe in God. We all have our own personal relationship with God. That's that's true religion, your personal relationship with God. So we can all have various beliefs. I like to sometimes talk about, like the thing with baptism. Some people believe that you could be sprinkled and that's good enough. Some people need to be dunked and that sort of thing. And some people believe you don't need to be baptized at all. That's okay. But basically, we all have that one underlying faith where we trust God in our life to help us be moral people, good people, do the right thing. And so I think that's the difference there, that we can have this one religion because it's your personal relationship with God. And we all have that. But we can have this diversity of these 13 different personalities or these 13 different tones through the belief system, that we can all believe different things. And as long as we're accepting of that we accept the fact that, well, you believe this and I believe that, and, that's okay. But there's a saying about being unity, but not uniformity. We can all be united in a personal religion, but not uniform in our beliefs. So I think that's an important thing to remember, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is. Thank you.
If we all know the importance of Jesus on our planet, so we're not going to go into that, but we know one thing, If Jesus did not approve of something, he would not have revealed one entire paper on the world religions. If to have different religions was not a good idea, I don't think he would have sat with Kneeland and gone into, they give us a description of the basic religions that were there at the time. And again, you mentioned 13, 13, 13. You mentioned 13, Santiago. Rick, you mentioned 13. If we think of Jesus with his 12 apostles, 13. And I was looking at the paper at the time of Jesus, there were 12, there were 10 religions mentioned in the paper, the world religions. And we know there's 2 that have added to that list because at the time, Islam did not exist. And now the Baha'i religion, which is also a beautiful religion, and that's 12. And what could be the third one? How about the Yubi religion, which is the religion of, you will see what I mean, because religion comes from the etymology means again, like in French, refaire, when the teacher goes, va refaire ton travail, it means go redo your homework because you didn't do it well. So means again, and legare, link. So to link again. And so we've been living with external religions that were teaching about God outside, angels outside, everything spiritual is outside. Now, what does the revelation of the Urantia book reveal? Is that we have our inside religion, religare with our thought adjuster, the fragment of God that indwells all of us, whatever creed, color, race, country, whatever. So it's again 12 plus 1, 13. And like you said, I like what you said, Rick, the language, we can have our societal language. The Chinese speak Chinese or Mandarin or whatever it is. Russians speak Russian, but a planetary language, which is the unifying language. And so to me, I see the UB religion, if I can say just quote unquote, it's the religion that will link everyone, or the revelation that will link everyone together, not only together as the true brotherhood of man, but also as above, so below. What did you say? As within, so without. So the same thing, without the kingdom of man, but within, it's that religare, relink with that divine fragment that have, like in an interview I did a couple of weeks ago. Oh, I think you know about that interview when I talked about turning the switch on. Humanity is discovering that we have a divine switch that just needs to do one thing, click, to turn it on. So we're not just in the human mode, but we're in the human divine mode, HD mode. Just like I said, machines have HD mode, high definition. Humans have the highest definition, which is the human and divine mode, which I think Jesus came as the model to start that in the direction to help us go toward light and life. So it's all interconnected, it goes click, 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 click.
This is what I told you, you start to see the numbers appearing magically, the 13, you just said it, Jesus and his followers made 13 about the religions. I mean, 13, and why suddenly is even the number 13 considered a bad sign? I don't know if it was done on purpose or what, why is the 13, we're seeing that it's so sacred, it's so important, and a lot of traditions use it. Why did it have this strange connotations? And I'm gonna actually now that we're gonna go deep into the mathematics and the structures of these tones and seals. So we're going to unpack this a little bit further, and it's very interesting because now we're bringing this math into the individual and the human collective of seeing humanity as a whole, all right? So this is where it starts to get very beautiful. What the Mayas stated in their cosmology is that the sun is the heart of our world, and the closest and the fastest way to get to God is not going out and looking into the, in the far distance, but there's like a nucleus there, and that's why it's the sun has like this core, and through him, and it's just pure light, and that's where we kind of, it's like a portal, like a wormhole into the heart of God. And what it says is that imagine the sun, it's like a heart that's beating. So every 260 days, and I'm going to tell you why. Every 360 days or every day, you have a different energy that it's emanating. It's not just that the sun is pouring out light, but every 260 days, you have a new sequence starts. And I'm going to tell you about the sequence, and it's right here. I mean, you're going to be seeing the visuals. So you have this sequence, and you have the Solkim, which is this matrix, and you have the 13 souls, 13 tones of creation, which emanate from heaven. And then when you get to the solar system, when you get to our planet and basically the sun, because that's the heart of our system, they turn into 20 seals, and these seals, instead of going in numbers, because we know the 13 tones and they have the qualities, but they are referred to as tones. Then we come to the seals and they are referred to as archetypes. And we start to seeing these symbols and these archetypes, and they are 20. And it starts with a dragon and it ends up with a sun. And, in further programs, we're going to be discussing each one of them, and we're going to be unpacking them, each quality. But how do we make, or how did they construct this 260 energy day matrix? If you take the human body and you look at it, we have 13 joints. We have 2 ankles, we have 2 knees, 2 hips, right? Where's that? That's 6. Then we have 2 wrists, that's 8. We have 10. That's here, over here, that's 12. And here, our neck, that's 13. So we have 13 joints, we have 13 joints, right? And where do we find the 20 seals? Where do we find the 20 seals? We have 20 fingers and 20, not 20 fingers. If we had toes and fingers, we have 20. So why, it's kind of magical, right? So why do we have that there? And look at, if you kind of think of human beings and you compare them to what the animals that are here on Earth, and close your eyes and you think of them, we're more similar to what we have represented as aliens than to what we have as, well, except for primates, to what we have here as humans. And look at human beings and look at these joints and look at our fingers, and it's sort of, we're like an antenna. And this is what they say. And you look at our proportion, it's the golden proportion, you look at our fingers. If you do this, here's the spiral that we were talking. I don't know, I can see it in the camera. That's the spiral, and it starts here and it evolves and it goes into my arm, and everything just evolves. You see how this is like an antenna. So what it tells us is that human beings, our own material creation, our own body, is an antenna that is aligned, or that is in tune to receive this information, not just the sun, not just the photosynthesis from the sun, but everything that is there that we do not see. There's a lot of information that we're receiving that we do not see. So every day we're having, that's why when you say, why did suddenly somebody think about this and somebody in the other part of the world also think about it? And then it kind of evolved in the same way. It's because we're receiving this structure, and that's the pattern that is encoded in the universe, and that we, even if we don't know it, we're following it, because that's the purpose, and that's a pattern that God laid out to be harmonious for us, to be within a cycle that's iterating, repeating itself and disclosing, it's just evolving. So here are the 13 tones and seals, and this makes these different combinations. It's 260 combinations that are called kins, and then we're going to be going into that deep, a little bit deeper. But these 260 combinations, if you kind of roughly map it out, gives you 9 months. So really, when the beginning of the conception to birth, it's roughly this cycle that the baby or the cell that turns out to be a baby is in the womb and is getting all this codification within the mother's womb, and basically preparing the life that it's going to be living, the start of life. And actually what it tells you is that before we really actually were born, there was something going on in different planes that was actually making us in there, getting everything together. And this is an interesting thing, because we're seeing this pattern in a 2D mode. But if you would just make this like in a cylinder, you would see the DNA. These green parts is the DNA, and everything in between is like the dark matter within the universe, something that we've always known that there's something in there, that there's information. It's just not empty space, but we quite don't understand what's in there. So this is the same structure, and we follow within the same structure. All right. What it says is that we have a gear system, and imagine that we are, each individual is this gear. We are a gear that internally 13 tones are moving within this and are making these combinations. And then we are connected to this grander sequence. And this sequence is connected to another sequence and another sequence. And when we start to make connections and we start to have a relationship, personal relationship in this plane with other people, we are making those connections. We are intertwining our paths together. So it's very poetic, but it's true. We are path, we're intertwining our paths, and we are becoming, part of the lives of other people, and they are becoming part of our lives, and we're integrating those pieces and making and constructing humanity. Constructing not only, and try to see it this way. Imagine that we are the cell and as individuals, and then humanity is the organism, it's the organ. Let's say the heart, and then the universe is the whole body, and there's different parts that conform the body.
It's interesting what you said, Santiago, because when I took my course in medicine, and the course that I loved the most was Anatomy and Physiology, A&P. And I will always remember when we studied the human body, but not on the blackboard or whatever, with real humans. Naturally, they were deceased, real humans. And I remember when I held a head in my hand, and the man looking at me with his eye open, I go, oh my God. And then the brain. And when we went inside the body and looked at the marvel, I remember when I put a lung in my hand like this, we have two lungs, a whole one lung, and it weighed less than this little thing. And I thought, what a miracle. And then I just had this, and I'm saying this because of what you said, I just had this vision that God in the universe, we were in the body of God, and each and every one of us human beings are one tiny little cell. So that again, as above, so below. So as we move, the body of God moves. And so the breath of the universe and so on and so forth. So it was completely complementary. And to me, it was giving worth to the expression, life is truly a miracle. It's more than magic. It is a miracle. And so I see that we are part of the actual body, the cosmic body of God. And
Exactly.
it's inspiring, very
Exactly.
inspiring. And it makes us more conscious of the responsibility that we have. We have a responsibility in that part. If we don't want the body of God to catch cancer, we have to behave accordingly in harmony.
You don't have to be, you can't be a cancerous cell. You can't be rebellious. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Exactly.
Exactly. And and this is a concept, and maybe it's the first time that you guys are going to hear this word, but God, well, not you guys, but our audience are going to hear the word God the Supreme. And it's a concept that we're going to be unpacking throughout this Divine Within project, because it's a very important concept that we're all part of.
Yeah, what you're talking about reminds me that anybody who's had a child, or anybody that's had like the experience that Diane has had in medical school or whatever, how could you not believe in a divine creator? When you see, and I've used this term before, when you see the simple complexity of life itself, how can you not believe that there's some intelligence that has created all this? I think that when we look at, like you're talking about, the spiral in nature and things like that, and the different things that make up our physical body, but then we understand that this physical body isn't us, that there's something, as we say with the show, the divine within. There's something within us that far transcends the material. How could anyone ever possibly have the idea that there's or question the existence of God, or the questions the God creating all of this?
Capture what you've been saying and put it into the tutor. And it was talking about domain of life is characterized by 3, 7, and 12 by multiples and combinations of these basic numbers. The number 10, the decimal system, is inherent in the physical universe, but not in the spiritual. Wondering, how does that tie in? If we have
Okay.
8 and 10 together, that is 13. Wondering, when it said it could be a combination, some of those basic numbers, a key to what you've been saying.
What it tells us is that we have three bodies, and we know this. We have mind, which is the consciousness. We have matter, which is the basic organic structure, the genetic coding, and the spirit, which kind of puts the decisions, or not takes the decision, puts the decisions in there, or where it leads us, kind of way. I don't want to say something that is not, kind of leads us. So we have these three bodies, and they have to be in balance. We have matter, spirit, and mind, and together we have inside of us what is going to be eternal. We have our soul, and together, I mean, eventually we're going to do without matter, but our mind and our spirit are going to be truthfully together with us and in our soul. And this is how we're creating, how, at least in this plane, which is the material plane, this planet, how we're balancing these bodies. And now we have three planes of action. And this is interesting. We have the mental, which is the thought. We have the material, which is action, and the spirit, which is eternal. And this chart that I have here is I like it very much, because it tells you just where everything starts and where it goes. So here we start everything, and think about ourselves, and think about the world that we created as humans. So think of the natural world. And in a way, when you think of the creation of man, it's been superimposed on top of the natural world. The buildings, the roadways, everything that has come from humanity's mind, it's something that first started in our mind, then it was created into matter, and is projected over there. But there is a third step that if we do not go there, I mean, and it's not that you're going to take a building to this third step, but there's many other things that you can take to this third step, or third plane, which is the spiritual. And that is everything that we do. Is what we're doing of eternal value? Is what we're doing really going to transcend, or are we just keeping everything in the mundane? All right. So think of an idea. When you have an idea, when it first comes in your mind, it's the first tone. And this is the magnetic tone in the mental plane. So you first got the idea. What happens next? It's the challenges in the mental plane. You break that idea. You think about it. And that's what the mind does, what the human mind does. It breaks it down. I have my goal. Now I've seen my challenges. I've identified my challenges. And then what I do, I find solutions to those challenges. I bring solutions. I bring a practical solution. I always use the example of a chair, I don't know who made the first chair, but I imagine a caveman, kind of being sore from sitting down and not being comfortable, and he's kind of said, I have to make something that's not killing my back. So he kind of thought that was my goal. So what do I do? And I don't think he just saw a chair, he kind of had to figure it out, I knew, I need something that I'm not, on the ground, and something that, maybe to height a little bit higher. So he's looking at his challenges, he's thinking of what to do and how to do it. And then he finds the solutions. Okay, if I take this board and I put these maybe branches here, and maybe he did a tripod and it's not sturdy. Oh, maybe if I put a fourth leg here and it's going to be more, and then you find the solution. So he found the solution and he got organized. And this is a simple example with a chair, but imagine anything, in a corporation, an enterprise, when you putting people together, you go through this process, and then you come to this fourth step, which is organization, before you take it to the material. Now you've identified your goal, you've seen your challenges, you've developed your solutions. Now you're organizing, you're putting it together, you're taking it. And how many times you think of a lot of stuff, and a lot of people are saying, okay, take it from the mental to the material. If you don't take this next step, everything just stays in the mind, and maybe something that's going to be beautiful, you're not taking that next leap. And remember what we were saying about, it's a spiral, and you suddenly jump from one plane to the other, and this is what happens when you got and you want to do it. Then you go to the next phase, or the next plane, which is the material. And in the material, you see here, before we start in the goals, but here we start with another one. And this in Mayan numerology represents 5. So you see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over here. So you go to the material, and it's a command. So now you have the command. So it's been approved, and you are now able to bring everything. It's been approved in the material plane. So got it, maybe, we're not taking it to the eternal part yet. So it maybe you got the funding from somebody. Okay, you got a business plan, you presented it, and somebody says, okay, I like it. You have the command. You are authorized to do it. And then the same sequence repeats, but now you have a bar here because you're in this material plane. And the same thing happens. You start to put it out. and you start with a goal, and you suddenly realize that you have to adjust, and it depends on the capacity for you to really identify the challenges and understand that the challenges will arise and that you have to meet them, and maybe not even deceive yourself and say everything is perfect, but you start to understand the challenges, and you start to understand the solutions. And surely but surely, if it's also based on intentions, this is it says that a lot of it has to do with what intention you put into this. If everything is good, you're going to bring it over here, and eventually it's going to be fruitful. Maybe, and this is interesting, why sometimes evil and anything that's not eternal can't jump here. Because once you exhaust the material, once you found the solutions, and you come to the organization, and you lay it out, and it's a nefarious intention, if it's a nefarious endeavor, if it's evil, then the spirit is not going to allow it to jump into this plane. It's going to stay there. And that's why evil things and evil never wins. And that's why this is common, because if we understand that everything comes from God and returns to God, this eventually gets cut here. And since it's cancerous, it's bad, it's not going to go into this plane and contaminate this plane. It's going to be quarantined, and it's not going to be, you're not going to let that influence that. So anything that is you get here, and it may be work. And this is a nice thing, an analogy, or not an analogy, but a good way to think about it. When you can go and do your job, and you can be, 9 to 5 and get the bills done, get the bills paid, and not, very mundane and nothing spiritual. But if instead you do your work, even if it's whatever, it can be the most laborious, but it's really rewarding to you. It really transcends and makes you really, it gives you a lot of rewards. It's really rewarding. And every day that you go and work, it's really like a giving thanks to God, and it's really like a prayer and a gratitude in that, and your life is fulfilled, and anything can go there. But for the purpose of explaining this, let's see how this goes into the spiritual plane. So once you exhaust this and it's been created, then you start to extract the transcendental values, what's going to be eternal. And as we know, anything that we do here in this material plane that has of a spiritual value will be everlasting, will be incorporated into God, into the universe, into the supreme, and it will be part of the universe. So anything that we do, and even why do we do this? It's because of this, because in the end, when we are happy with people, when not happy, when we feel this love and we are connected with people and we share and we do this, it's really what matters. It might sound like a cliche, but it's really what matters. So this jumps over here, and you have the command, and then you go and also you have to see how the spiritual goals and the spiritual challenges, and then you find the solution. But from here, we're missing the organization, because once you find the solution, the act is ours, the consequence is God's. But from here, God takes it and incorporates this that you created from your mind, processed through your material, and elevated through your spiritual into the eternal. And that's for this segment. I really like this part.
Okay, I'll tell you what we have from the tutor. And I was based on what you were saying about finding solutions. And I said, what is the most positive course of action? And it said the most positive course of action in finding solutions is one that aligns with the highest values of truth, beauty, and goodness, while fostering harmony, growth, and mutual understanding. A truly positive solution is not merely a practical fix to a problem, but a response that uplifts all involved, respects the dignity of others, and contributes to the greater good. Begins with a mindset rooted in love, empathy, and a sincere desire to serve, recognizing that every challenge is an opportunity for growth, both individually and collectively. The step in this process is to seek clarity and understanding. It involves approaching the situation with humility and an open mind, and to perceive truth of the matter from multiple perspectives. Doing so, you not only gain a fuller understanding of the problem, to demonstrate respect for the experiences and viewpoints of others. Openness fosters collaboration and creates an environment where creative and constructive solutions can emerge. It's important to remember that truth is often multifaceted. Best solutions are those that integrate diverse insights into a harmonious whole.
That's very interesting. Very interesting, and it goes hand in hand. Exactly.
Well, I'll add something here, I guess. But Santiago, you were talking about people with ideas and turning ideas into solutions and that sort of thing there. But that's kind of one of the things that I try to remember too is there's the converting potentials to actuals. So potentials
Mm-hmm.
are ideas. This is an idea that I have that or this is the I have an idea that this can be done. But if you don't take that idea and turn it into a result, then it's really just not worth much. So a lot of people, and I do this too. I'm not you know I'm guilty of this myself. Have lots of ideas, but converting an idea to a result is sometimes difficult. But that's the difference between people who are successful at doing something and people who aren't. Is be able to take an idea or a concept and convert the potential into something that's actual. By building a team to do that, by seeing a way of a problem and then finding a way to solve that. But that's really what makes life interesting is having those problems to solve, having those ideas, or seeing a need, or seeing something that needs to be done, or some way to serve. It's seeing those challenges and having the curiosity, and then solving those problems. Striving to solve those problems in whatever way that problem needs to be solved. And then, but that's the grand adventure of life. I think is problem solving. That's what really makes our daily life interesting. I mean, if you live a life and you've got plenty of money and nothing ever goes wrong and all that, life can be kind of boring for people like that. I think that's why when you see a lot of rich people get into the drug scene and things like that, because it's kind of boring. They don't have to solve any problems. They want something fixed, they just tell somebody to fix it and it's fixed. So they have no real challenge in life. I think, especially us address this kind of to the young people that might be watching. Don't be stressed out by the problems that come your way. Those are the things that make life interesting. Those are the things that help you grow, become a better person, and just create this adventure that we call life. I'd like to touch a little bit on Diane's experience. Diane, I didn't know you had that experience, like with the medical school and things like that. But it touches on one of the things that I've thought about is, what's the difference between a person who's dead and a person who's alive? And I've read where, many years ago they would take a dead person, they would weigh a person, and then after they died, weigh them again. What is the difference between a live person and a dead person? And materially, there's nothing. It's only the energy that we call life that animates that physical body that's gone. Well, where'd that go? Well, and I'm not saying this is accurate, but this is my theory. There's a theory that says that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. Our physical body, the matter that's we're made of, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, our body returns back to the physical world where it came from. But what happens to the mind and what happens to the spirit that's within us? What happens to the mind and the spirit that are the true us that lives within this physical body? If you apply science to that, it carries on because that energy, whatever that energy may be, cannot be created or destroyed. It goes on. And I think that's where eternal life comes in, is that carrying on of the divine within, our personality, our mind, and all that continues on. So I kind of got that
Exactly.
kind of what Diane was talking about there with her experience.
Totally.
I asked the chair if we're on the fringe, we'd like to live in coordination with the Supreme. What would we do? The concept of the fringe can be understood in various ways depending on the context it's used. Actually and philosophically, fringe often represents the edges of understanding, boundaries of experience, outer limits of what is known or accepted. The space where exploration occurs, ideas are born, and where the unknown creates curiosity and courage. It can be both a place of challenge and opportunity. It requires stepping beyond the familiar and engaging with certainty or conventional perspectives. Concept personal growth. Fringe might symbolize those areas of life called to expand your awareness or confront fears or limitations. At the edges of your comfort zone, transformation often takes place. Entering into the fringe, you open yourself to new possibilities, truths, and a broader understanding of yourself, universe. Process requires faith. Unknown can be daunting, also offers the potential for profound growth, discovery. Societal perspective, the fringe refers to ideas, movements, individuals that exist outside the mainstream. These may initially be viewed as unconventional or controversial, can play a vital role in challenging established norms, fostering innovation. Humanity's greatest advancements have emerged, the fringe, as willing to think differently or explore uncharted territory, paved the way for new insights and progress. For it is important to approach the fringe with discernment, balancing openness to new ideas with a commitment, truth, and integrity. Spiritually, the fringe might also be seen as the threshold between the material and the transcendent, where finite human experience meets the infinite reality of divine. It's a sacred space of encounter. Mysteries of existence invite contemplation and communion. Here, at the edges of understanding, you are called to trust in the guidance of the divine presence within you, leads you toward greater truth, beauty, and goodness.
But there's a couple of things I think that are important that you that Diane touched on, and Santiago, that you touched on it. I'd like to get in here, but
Sure.
Diane was talking about, error and sin and that sort of thing. And, I'll address this to the younger people out there. And by younger, I mean like spiritually younger people. You mature, mortally younger or older, but we can all be spiritually different ages too. So, but I think one of the things that people often wreck their spiritual life on, or wreck their religion on, is this concept of error, evil, and sin. And too often, I think we take error and evil and turn it into sin when it's not really that. And so I think it's important for those listening to us to understand the difference between those. Error means I made a mistake. Big deal. We all make mistakes. It's part of the growth process. So don't beat yourself up when you make a mistake. Error is not that big a deal. It's a learning process. And then comes evil. Well, evil is when, this is my understanding anyway. Evil is when you do something wrong and you kind of know it's wrong, but you do it anyway. Sin becomes when you reject God's will. I know God wouldn't want me to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's sin. And that's when you get into real trouble. That's when your eternal salvation is endangered, when you get to that level. Now you can turn away from sin, but iniquity is when you've gone to the point where that habit of sin, or that sin, becomes habitual. And then that's where, you're just lost. So I think it's important for people to understand that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things wrong. You're going to do things that, I wish I hadn't done that. But that's not necessarily sin. So don't wreck your whole spiritual life because of that misunderstanding of what sin actually is. And Santiago, you talk about God's will. And I think it's another thing that oftentimes people struggle with. When I heard it said once, and I think it's very simple, that God is love, God is truth, God is beauty, and God is goodness. And if you want to know what God's will is, it's those four things. And if you're doing those four things, then you can rest assured that whatever you're doing is God's will. So I think it's a lot simpler than what we make it too difficult sometimes, I think.
It actually is. It actually is. I always tell my kids, does it make you warm and fuzzy inside? Yeah, so do it. If it doesn't make you warm and fuzzy, don't do it. And that's it. Because it's somebody inside of us telling us, yeah, it's warm and fuzzy, you can do it. But and let me, before I go with you, Diana, I think it's important. I once heard a radio show, and I was actually in Texas, and I used to work over there, and it's very Christian community, and I was listening to the radio going to work, and they were interviewing this guy that was had been hostage with the Taliban. I mean, this was probably 10 years ago, and they were interviewing him, and they asked him, they said, so when you were their prisoner, when you were their captive, these people knew they were doing evil, I mean, how was it that they were doing it? And his answer really stunned me. He said, you'd be surprised at the human, our capacity, our brain's capacity, our mind's capacity to justify things, and that's when we fall into inequity and evil. When we go into that sequence, and when we know that we erred, and then we made, it's mistakes, and then we consciously accepted those mistakes and took them to the next level and made them an error and made it iniquitous, that it's wrong. But we can deceive ourselves, and we can even say that, yeah, it's good. And that really got to me. And finally, that's what we're talking about, the cancer. When you get to the iniquitous, well, sorry, you're not going to be part of this eternal life and this eternal thing, because you're cancer. We're going to have to cut you short. you know
People have to realize how important to have the will is, because we know that Jesus said, when people asked him, like, why don't you intervene? Or, why don't you have your magic wand and go and correct whatever, And what did Jesus say? I cannot do that. I must respect my Father who has given you free will. That means it's your choice, like you mentioned, Santiago, earlier, to do our free will. But we need to think. We need to go to the mental level to think. I love your expression. Does that make you feel fuzzy or not? I'll remember that. I like
yeah, it is.
and it's gorgeous. It's applicable. Okay. And so it's this. And also another point that comes to me, and that is that I was saying that Jesus left us only one prayer, and that is our Father. And then he taught 5 points about praying to make sure that our prayer is most effective, because they do teach us that some prayers don't rise from the ground. It's like, it stays at the ground level. Some prayers will go vertical straight to heaven. And those 5 points, the fifth one is very important, because it is that our prayer be beyond being unselfish, believing, sincere, intelligent, related to wisdom. The fifth one is trustful, full of trust in what? In submission to the Father's. They could have said, Jesus, they could have told us, in submission to the Father's will. No. Oh, why? Because to me, the Father, God the Father, has the 360-degree viewpoint. He sees it from all angles. So he's all wise. So his will is not just a will. It's all wise, as opposed to us, where that little fraction, we see it from one little angle. From our angle, it can look or see or pretend to be like, yeah, that's the answer. Yeah, man, let's go. But if we go higher and we ask and pray, ask and you shall receive. Is this okay, Father? From 360-degree angle, he might inspire us to say, think about it twice. It's not the best thing. So the more we unite our will with the will of our Father, who is the fragment, the parcel, the spark, the divine spark in us, the more to me, it's the ideal marriage, because it's human and divine, HD mode. And enlightened life, we won't even question. Sometimes I say to my study group, what is the exception now as opposed to the norm? Enlightened life, the exception will become the norm, and the opposite will be the exception, So it's just a matter, again, the body of God, which is the supreme, growing. And this is why we need to be respectful of every one of his creatures, because it's like every one of his creatures are one tiny little, we have trillions and trillions of cells in our body. So this is us. One is you, one is you, one is you. So we must be respectful of every one of his.
Everybody. Exactly, because we're all in this together, and we're all part of this.
Yes.
That is true.
Yes.
Well, thank you really for this chat. It's been really enjoyable. It's an interesting topic, something that it's sometimes hard to understand, but I think that the point was there, that we are part of this divine pattern, we're part of this divine structure, we are part of this co-creation of the universe. And as we see ourselves in this creation, in this, and being part of this, and we can, like we showed in this program, we can be in a negative, in a neutral, or in a positive, and it's just the charges. It's as simple as that: positive, negative, or neutral. We can choose to be whatever that is, and I always choose to be as positive as I can be, because it's always the best thing and it's the most rewarding, as I have come to believe. And I'm sure that all of you have come to believe.
That's-
So,
And it makes you feel fuzzy.
and it makes you feel fuzzy. That's the most important thing. Yeah, that's the most important
I
part.
like that.
Well, thank you guys. It was really a pleasure. And thank all of you for joining us in this episode of The Divine Within. Once again, I ask you to, if you like the show, share it. If you liked it, please subscribe, follow us, and be sure to go and visit all of our different tools because we made them for you. It's really for your personal journey. It's for you to really take it on yourself, to really do it in a special and quiet way. And we hope that they will help you in your personal journey with your divine within. I'm Santiago Kneeland. Thank you for joining us and see you next time.